Please note, we would like to make it very clear, we are totally against the form of discipline described in the articles and accounts being used on minors and non-consenting adults. Although some of these accounts are fictional, and others may be an exaggerated reality, none of them are too far from the truth of what really happened back in those days. If you are enjoying our stories, please do subscribe to this channel. We will be posting many more stories as time goes by.
Why 6 of the best? Prior to 1940, most offences were treated with the same punishment. That was 6 strokes of the cane on the bottom. It seems that once a boy was in senior school, any offence was 6 strokes. The idea being to make the caning hurt as much as possible. A boy would get 1 stroke and feel the full effects, knowing that he had to keep bending over for more strokes and feeling each stroke hurting more than the previous. As we move into the 1960 era, it was felt that boys did not need such harsh punishment, and the number of strokes varied with the offence. Also, for many reasons, caning was done on the hands as well as the bottom. Hand caning prior to 1940 tended to be done on the non-writing hand. A boy could take 6 strokes on one hand, leaving it swollen and unable to be used for days. Later, caning was spread out to an equal number of strokes on each hand. Of course, for every rule there is the exception. In most cases, boys got at least 2 strokes of the cane on the hands or bottom, very rarely 1. This was to make the boy suffer, having to hold out his other hand to get what he has just got on his other hand, or keep his bottom still for another painful whack. Many regarded this process as being as bad as actually taking the whack. Entries in punishment books can be confusing when giving the number of strokes. 1 on the hands. Hands is plural, therefore each hand got 1 stroke. 1 on the hand means that just 1 stroke was given on just 1 hand. 1 on each hand means just what it says. The same applies for 2 or 3 strokes. The number of strokes on the hands varied with the offence, and each hand got the same number. When caning on the bottom, it cannot be confined to 1 buttock at a time. This is why it goes up in multiples of 2. 1 on each hand is 2 whacks, so the bottom is whacked twice. This was important as all schools liked to punish the same for certain offences. Bullying was 3 on each hand, which meant 6 on the bottom. Constant lateness was 1 on each hand, which was 2 on the bottom. Most schools gave the same number of strokes for the same offence. Some on the hands, others on the bottom. The severity of the caning not only varied with the force of the stroke. A more painful stroke on the hand could be given by getting the fingers, whereas on the bottom the lower bottom tops of legs feel more pain than the central area. Of course, on the bottom the pain can be increased by doing it on a boy's pants or the bare bottom. 3 strokes in total was hardly ever given on the hands, but was sometimes given on the bottom. This was when the head was going to cane over trousers and thought 2 strokes, due to the protection, was not enough. Other times it could have been 4 on the boy's pants, but felt it would hurt or mark his bottom more than deserved, so reduced it to 3. 5 strokes was not a number given, unless as a result of moving. The exception is the Barry Tavener case. Why 6? I suppose you could just as well ask why a cane. Why did English teachers think it natural to use a flexible stick to hurt children with, where American teachers thought it was natural to use a flat piece of wood? Or why did English parents use a slipper, where American parents used a hairbrush? Surely the answer is because it's a tradition. Getting the cane isn't just being hurt, it's being hurt in the traditional, rather stylized way. In one way, the tradition made the punishment less traumatic. Children were prepared to submit to a caning because being hurt in that particular way was a traditional part of being at school. If the teacher had said, "Stand there while I throw this stone at you 3 times," the child would have refused or felt degraded, even if the stone throwing didn't hurt any worse than the cane, because it wasn't what you expected or accepted from a teacher. But in another way, the tradition made the punishment a bigger deal. Getting the cane in the traditional way represented the very worst punishment the school was allowed to give. It made you realize how bad you'd been, even if it didn't hurt much more than, say, a smack on the legs or a clip round the ear. The famous advert for the Bogner Cane Company said that this was why canes have curly handles, because that's what kids expect canes to look like. The sense of having been caned counts for more than the pain caused by the caning. The symbolism is important to teachers as well, I think. Nice, liberal teachers who would never dream of punching or slapping anyone somehow thought that a proper caning, done according to the traditional rules, didn't really count as hitting. Nasty, brutal teachers who might have lost their temper and boxed a child's ears or kicked him downstairs kept their anger under control, because they were only allowed to hit a child in one way, on one part of the body, with one type of stick, a set number of times. I think that a lot of children and teachers would have thought that a whacking with a length of wooden dowling or a twig didn't really count as a caning. I think they may also have thought that 4 or 6 whacks wasn't quite a proper caning either. What I really meant was on some occasions hazel branches were used, not birch. I believe this came from the recent BBC4 documentary on CP and referred to the situation on the Isle of Man. Judging from documentaries I have seen on the Isle of Man, I suspect the Women's Institute has denuded all of the available birch trees for their own perversity. I am of course referring to the WI folk practicing the use of the birch for the TV cameras about the time abolition came up, depicting middle-aged women with twin sets practicing with the birch on each other. Personally, I think that while knowledge of the realities of SCP will inevitably become more vague, it will not disappear from our culture here in the UK for some time yet. Even if they do not encounter old-style classroom exhibits in museums on private visits, young schoolchildren are often taken on school trips to such sites. While they may well form the opinion that the cane was applied only to the hand and only to boys, they are almost certain to see a cane, hear the term 6 of the best, and learn that there was once something called corporal punishment used in many schools. As regards caning generally, in the wider world of course caning as a school punishment is still used in some regions. It is though possibly more likely to be noted by the British public in its JCP manifestations. From time to time newspapers and other media highlight the misadventures of some stupid European or American who has taken it into their head to paint graffiti on Singaporean public transport or similar and has been sentenced to be caned. Similarly, canings ordered by religious courts in Aceh, Indonesia, and some Malay states make the news occasionally, especially when they are conducted in public and the recipients are female. There are indeed many expressions, phrases still common use, but very few people nowadays know the original meanings of them. Many of these are often misquotes too. I believe the great majority of adult people in the UK will still recognise it as referring to old-fashioned corporal punishment, particularly that used in schools. Military and judicial CP of the past was often far in excess of 6 strokes. So even 6 hard strokes would relate to what was seen in the past as a mild punishment. Of course it really hurt and left marks, but within a week or so it had gone. However, the memory remained for very much longer, for some forever. So why was it 6? The answer to that relates to the pre-decimal era. Up to 1971 in the UK, much of the numeric system was based on 12 or a dozen. 12 old pennies equaled 1 shilling. Eggs and many other items were sold by the dozen. For some obscure reason, eggs are still sold by the dozen or half dozen. The Western world's calendar has 12 months. All that said, the old imperial measure system had varying ways relating to solids, liquids, and distances. Many of these measures were from ancient times and quite quaint, but they were a nightmare to generations of schoolchildren and many adults too. Anyway, back to the original question, why 6 of the best? The simple answer is, I believe, it was a practical number with the way of counting at the time. People counted in dozens then. I am not sure quite when 6 was first used in most UK schools, late Victorian times perhaps. It was about this time when education was becoming compulsory, up to about 12 at least, and controlled by local authorities. 6 was a convenient figure too, easily broken down for lesser punishments. One reads of 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and the full 6, never 5. With hand canings, 2, 4 or 6 could be divided equally between left and right hands. A single stroke of the cane was generally given on the left hand or the non-writing hand. 3 of the cane was more common, for bottom canings being half of the maximum. School canings were usually fairly quick punishments, even a full 6 was over in a minute or so provided the victim cooperated. Some schools had traditions involving long waits before the actual punishment. Quite what was considered the best is difficult to define. Full force might be offered as one answer, but that depend on the type of cane and the person applying it. One reads of trousers down or the wearing of thin PE shorts for a caning too. I have read that in 1972, when the UK school leaving age was increased from 15 to 16, some lees authorised the maximum punishment for those in the final school year to be increased to 8 strokes. In Scotland, a heavier tawse was also made available for the same reason. I have purposefully avoided talking of girls being punished at school, but much of the above applies to them too. In my day, of the best was widely understood to mean the strokes would be laid on as hard as possible to make the caning as severe as possible. This was the intended implication when the term was used. Reality was likely variable and uncertain. Canes varied in size, weight, and temper. Teachers varied in skill, strength, and resolution. 2 strokes from one teacher was worth 6 from another. There is reason to believe that most teachers laid it on as hard as they could, most of the time easing off only for delicate boys. The distress felt by the recipient varied depending on the circumstances. Speedily administered deserved punishments likely caused less trauma than delayed and unfair punishments. Boys caught fighting who were immediately caned got off lightly compared to those who were caned next day. The fear of a first caning was immense. Even more so if you'd seen another boy being caned or the marks it left. In my school in the late 50s to mid-60s, the full-scale 6 of the best was reserved for the most serious offences. 3 of the best was far more common. I can't remember any of my classmates getting a 6-stroke caning. 3 seemed to be the norm for repeat offenders. 1 stroke was often given to boys who were caned for the first time, including me. I was caught riding my bicycle along a footpath with 2 friends, having forgotten them we had been warned not to. We were caught, sent to the head, given a stern lecture, and we had a choice of an hour in detention after school or 1 stroke of the cane. We all chose the cane. I was a little curious to find out what it was like and compared our stripes in the toilets afterwards. Back to the question, why was 6 the figure that was associated with spanking? As I have said in previous posts, these were pre-decimal days. The dozen, 12, was a common unit in many things. Eggs are still sold in dozens even now. 12 months in a year, 12 old pennies in a shilling. School punishments were generally a quicker affair than home punishments too. A visit to the headmaster was usually over quicker once guilt was established. At home, spankings could take longer. Some youngsters were sent to their bedrooms first. Some had to wait until dad came home. At home there were no rules about how many whacks could be given, but most parents were sensible about it. At home it was just mum and me. Dad died when I was about 5. I remember knowing when I was in my mum's bed books all evening and suspecting a tanning was likely. When my bedtime finally arrived and I was in my pajamas, I'd be told off again. Then it was across mum's knee for what she called a good hiding. Then she slapped my bottom. At first the slaps didn't really hurt too much, but as she kept slapping the sting really built up. Sometimes she'd pause to tell me off again, maybe to get her breath too. Usually it was done across my pajamas trousers, sometimes they were pulled down. When I was that bit older, 10 or 11 perhaps, top end of junior school age, mum slippered my bottom a few times. I had lay over the end of her bed, a bit more grown up. The slipper hurt right from the first whack, and I had much fewer whacks with it than from mum's hand. Once I was in senior school, I'd passed my 11+ exam. I became more familiar with the phrase 6 of the best. As I understood, it was the ultimate punishment before expulsion. That said, I knew of no one ever being expelled, but some lads did get 6 of the best from the headmaster's cane. After getting my first school caning, I realized that what I had at home were fairly mild punishments, but believe me, they didn't feel like it at the time. Schools all over the UK seemed to have their methods and how the frequency varied. My school tended to give a firm 3 of the best to all years, 1st to 5th. Missing a detention meant 2 strokes unless you were a repeat offender. Then it was a proper 3 of the best. 6 of the best was reserved for more serious misbehavior. I found myself in continuing trouble when just in the 5th form. It was more or less just a bit of showing off. Nothing too sinister. After one silly prank, I was told to go to the deputy head's office after Friday school. I knew that would probably mean one thing. When I got there, he sat me down and gave me a firm talking to. I was basically told to grow up and act my age. He said I needed to settle down and work for my GCE exams the next summer. I began to think I was going to get away with just a warning when he stood and said, "Let's get it over with, remove your blazer." I realized that he was going to cane me. I was told pull my shirt tail out of the back of my trousers and to bend over his desk. Once I was in place, he gave me a proper 6 of the best. My bottom was sore for the whole weekend. Unlike you, I wasn't spanked at home into my teens. A slippering from my mother hurt, but it was never like the cane at school.